Hello and welcome back to the MOOC Oral History. The topic of the unit is audio to text transcription. Oral history relies on recorded interviews to capture personal memories and experiences. Transcription, converting spoken interviews into written text, is a foundational step in most oral history projects. By producing a text, transcriptions make audio interviews searchable, quotable, and analyzable for researcher and the wider public. Indeed, as Francis Good notes, transcription of oral history interviews is a key element of the enterprise more often than not. Transcripts allow historians to index and reference interviews in publication, and they enable textual analysis techniques that are difficult to apply directly to audio or video readings. However, the process of transcription is far from mechanical. It involves interpretive decision about punctuation, grammar, inclusion of pauses and non-verbal sounds, and even the language's register use. These decisions have important implication for how faithfully the transcript reflect the original speaker's voice and meaning. This lecture note reviews the role and method of transcription in oral history, focusing on the sub-themes, the transcription process itself, question of accuracy, authenticity, and interpretation, and privacy and ethical issues. Throughout, we draw on K oral history scholarship. For example, Willa K. Bohm's Transcribing and Editing Oral History, 1977, and Kate Moore's seminal article, Perversion of the Word, The Role of Transcription in Oral History, Michael Fries's work on oral history methodology, and collected essays in the Oral History Reader, edited by Parks and Thompson, 2006, as well as other studies. We also considered how new digital technologies, example audio indexing, automated transcriptions, are reshaping these practices. Transcription in oral history. Transcription is the process of listening to a recorded interview and producing a written document. Traditionally, this is done manually. An interviewer or hired typist listen to an audio cassette or digital file and types out the dialogue. Accuracy depends on the transcriber's skill, familiarity with the speaker's accents and speech patterns, and understanding of the context. Francis Good emphasized that transcription requires significant expertise. Even skilled typists must have appropriate experience and appreciation of difference between spoken and written grammar. He cautions that no matter how good initial drafting must be, subsequent checking to the tape is always necessary. In practice, most oral history programs establish editorial guidelines to ensure consistency. Francis Good notes that programs often have internally consistent editorial approaches in-house rules and rationalized procedures. Although these vary widely between projects, he argued it is important for each project or archive to document its inscription policies, example, which speech features to include punctuation style. He argues it is important for each project our archive to document its transcription policies, example, which speech features to include punctuation style, handling of dialect, and to make this clear to users. In all cases, the transcriber must balance the project's goal. Example, preserving every utterance versus producing a readable narrative against practical constraints like times, cost, and reliability. Willa Bohm's classic guide optimized one editorial philosophy. Bohm advised producing a usable research manuscript from an interview. In Bohm's view, this may require cutting out unnecessary impediments to the flow of the story and even recording materials to suit the research narrative. Such interventions removing filler words, clarifying grammar, adding context for clarity, make the transcript more accessible to readers at the cost of creating a text that is quite different from the raw interview. Bohm herself acknowledged that not everyone will agree with this approach, but she advocates it for the sake of research usability. Other oral historians emphasize maximal fidelity. Some projects produce verbatim transcripts that attempt to capture literally everything spoken, including false starts, repetitions, and even non lexical sounds, mm, mhm, laughter, etc. For example, one published oral history of Rogers' Dreamtime Nightmare states, as a historian, I have transcribed those experiences by verbatim. Nothing is added, nothing is suppressed, but for the sake of clarity, it has been necessary to rearrange some of the material either chronologically or with regarded to subject matter. Here, the editor claimed to preserve every word while only adjusting organization. This approach aims for archival completeness in community projects involving non native English speakers. Verbatim transcription often makes obvious how oral speech differs from standard written English so that readers can see and hear the narrator's actual language. For example, one published oral history of Bill Rogers' Dreamtime Nightmare states, as a historian, I have transcribed those experiences verbatim. Nothing is added, nothing is suppressed, but for the sake of clarity, it has been necessary to rearrange some of the material either chronologically or with regarded to subject matters. Here, the editor claimed to preserve every word while only adjusting organization. This approach aims for archival completeness. In community projects involving non native English speakers, verbatim transcription often makes obvious how oral speech differs from standard written English so that readers can see and hear the narrator's actual language. There is no single correct method. Different projects require different styles. Some transcripts are verbatim, capturing every utterance, others are lightly edited. Still, others are heavily edited into narrative. As Francis Good and others note, oral history manuals and handbooks outline many options, but practitioners make choice based on their aims and audiences. What all agree on is that transcription is a skill, labor intensive task. Francis Good warns that inexperienced typists cannot simply transcribe well. Without insight, quality transcription takes a maturity of ideas about language and some insight on the divergence between spoken and written approaches to grammar. For this reason, some archives pay a professional editor or experienced historians to prepare transcription. Others even have narrators review and approve transcripts to ensure accuracy. In summary, transcription involves important editorial decisions. It transforms oral testimony into a text, but each transcription convention necessarily imposes an interpretation of the spoken word. Accuracy, authenticity, and interpretation. Because transcription involves choices, debates have arisen above accuracy, faithfully capturing what was said, authenticity, in bracket, preserving the speaker's voice and meaning, and interpretation, how transcript form influence understanding. Critics point out that written transcripts inevitably flatten spoken language and can mislead readers about meaning. As Michael Fries observes, nobody pretend that the transcription is, is in any real sense a better representation of reality than the voice itself. Transcription omit tune, gestures, and the music of speech, meaning that any written record can only approximately the interview. In fact, Francis Good quotes Barry York on the special charm of oral speech that tends to be lost in text. The tension is evident. While text is easier for analysis and sharing, it can never fully replicate orality. Some oral historians see this tension as a acceptable. The gains of having a textual record, searchability, ease of quotation, and accessibility outweigh the inevitable losses. The assumption has long been that only in text can, in bracket, oral history material be efficiently and effectively engaged. Text is easier to read, scan, search, publish, or display and distribute. Even knowing that transcription loses some textures, most programs treat transcription as a near universal necessity. Nonetheless, this adaptation is not uncritical. Francis Good and other emphasize that the difference between oral and written forms can be fundamental pointers to what oral historians seek to achieve. At the core are two worries that editing will omit important information and that reliance on transcript will blur the line between original evidence and researcher interpretation. This debate came to a head in Kate Moore's influence essay 1997, Perversion of the World, the Role of Transcript in Oral History. Moore vehemently opposes the readability imperative, the terms transcript for prose style. She argues that every utterance, pause, false start, filler word, quote unquote, like, repetition, and even the interviewer's back channel cues, yeah, should be retained because these are valuable communicative evidence. More contents that these features carry meaning. For example, a speaker hesitation or emphatic token may reveal thought process or emotional states. She also argued transcribers to follow conversational analysis practice and not to censor any part of the spoken record. In her view, editing out such element does not add materially to the text and instead create unnecessary interpretations. Cadmore's stance is that fidelity to orality can yield analytic insight inaccessible from a polished text. Other scholars disagree. Rosemary Block, for example, maintains that excessive fidelity can burden readers without substantially improving understanding. She and others advocate for a selective approach, arguing that omitting certain crutch words or smoothing grammar can improve clarity with little cost to meaning. In practice, many transcribers compromise. They may note emphatic vocalization and pauses that they affect meaning. Example, an emphatic no or a gasp, but omit routine back channel or filler speech that readers can mentally filter out. Elizabeth Wright suggests that transcripts should use the narrator's actual word and above all reflect the intent and meaning of the narrators. Even if that means something syntax for readability. Francis Good echoes this view. Producing a readable written document from spoken material should involve using the speaker's own language but can adapt it to print conventions. The contrast between this position highlight the interpretive nature of transcription. Kate Moore herself acknowledges this by wanting new notation system to indicate things like intonation or gesture. Francis Good's discussion of punctuation point out that punctuation is a blunt tool. It is purely literate and cannot reliably convey pauses or emphasis. He really notes that in transcript, commas might mark pauses that speakers emphasize or might be omitted where the speaker naturally pauses. A transcript user can be fooled into think indicate the way something is said, when it often reflects the transcriber's grammatical choices. This illustrates how two transcriber might render the same recording differently, shaping reader interpretations. Further, Francis Good warns of a cognitive pitfall. Readers of a transcript may unconsciously hear an accent or inflection in their mean that isn't actually present in the audio. As Francis Good paraphrases Barry York, there is a risk of boggling readers to hear inflection and cadence that is product more of their own imagination than what may it in reality by apprehended in the original sounds. In other words, the written words invite readers to imagine tune, but that imagination may not match the speaker. This again underscores that a transcript is not transparent, it is always a mediated version of oral event. Given these complexities, scholars like Michael Fries advise reflexivity. Transcribers and editors should be self conscious about their decision. Fries argues that being aware of the issues implicit in editing helps practitioners resolve how to transcribe in ways suitable to its project's needs. In commentary, Fries himself supports Kate Moore's underlying goal of preserving as much orality as possible, even if he calls some of her suggestions a slippery slope. The implication is that there is no one size fits all situation. Rather, oral historians must be transparent about their choices. Many recommend include an editorial preface or translator's note explaining what was or was not included, for example, noting whether the transcript is clean or verbatim, so that readers understand the limits of the text. In summary, accuracy in transcription is an in-text goal. Transcription can never fully convey the richness of speech and any editorial intervention. However, small is interpretive. Authenticity means trying to preserve the speaker's voice and intent, but even faithful transcription transcript lose element of context. As Francis Good puts it, transcript present strictly as they were recorded, but with unavoidable editorial framing. Readers and researchers must therefore treat transcripts critically, remembering that they represent the spoken word through the filter of the transcriber's pen or keyboards. This is why oral historians sometimes play audio clips alongside transcripts in teaching or publication to let audience directly hear the voice behind the text. Privacy. Transcripts also raise important privacy and ethical issues. Unlike published texts that may anonymize or fictionalize sources, Oral history transcript often contains sensitive personal information as told by interviewees. Protecting participant privacy is an ethical imperative. Many projects address this by using pseudonyms and obtaining informed consent. For instance, some narrators specifically request that their real names not be used or that recording not be archived publicly. In such cases, transcript may hide identifying detail or apply privacy restriction when deposited in archives. The rise of digital archives and the internet has intensified this concern. Brett Inon notes that the spirit of digital technology is forcing archives to rethink their roles and function and to confront difficult questions of security, protection, and accessibility. At a 1998 Oral History Association meeting, archivists explicitly raised the risk that posting oral interviews and transcription on the web could violate interviews' privacy. They worried about misuse and manipulation of sound recordings and transcripts, and the unmonitored access the internet provides. As one archivist pointed out, donation agreement drawn up before the digital age may not permit online distribution without explicit permission from narrators or their heirs. In practice, some institutions have chosen to restrict access to transcripts or delay publication if consent is unclear. Karen Brester's study, Internet Access to Oral Reading Finding the Issues, found that many archives painstakingly seek permission from interviewees before making recordings available online. Others explicitly mark transcripts as private or require special clearance to view them. Ethical practice thus requires balancing research value against individual rights. Transcribers and oral historians are advised to discuss its narrators how the material will be used and to honor any privacy requests. This might mean redacting sensitive passages, example on health, finance, or other private matters, using pseudonyms for self or others, or choosing not to transcribe certain segments at all. As Francis Good observes, an interviewer may even stop an interview early to respect an interview's boundaries. Foundationally, the question, whose history is it, guides the decision. If a narrator claim ownership over their story, they should have some say in how it appears in the record. Tension can arise when researchers feel compelled to publish interviews, often expensive to conduct. But participants wish to remain anonymous or to limit dissemination. Resolving this ethical dilemma between institutional needs and interview rights requires ongoing dialogue and clear consent procedures. In summary, privacy considerations shape what gets transcribed and released. Transcribers must take care not to violate promises of confidentiality. When interviews enter archives, access to their transcripts is often governed by laws, example, defamation, privacy rights, and institutional policies. In the digital era, maintaining privacy can require technical safeguards, quote unquote, password protection, restriction database, and legal clarity. Release form that explicitly cover online access. These measures ensure that the stories entrusted to oral historians do not inadvertently harm or embarrass narrators when the transcripts circulate widely. Digital technologies and transcription. The impact of digital tools is so significant that we need to address it here. The shift from analog to digital recording and from paper archive to online database is reshaping transcription practices. Several scholars, notably Michael Fries, have argued that digitization is challenging the traditional role of transcripts. Fries suggests that digital audio and video allow us to put the oral back in oral history by making recorded interviews more accessible without forcing them into text. In practice, digital recording like MP3, digital audio tape, etc., has made collecting and preserving interviews easier, but also created a vast backlog of material. Many archives now hold thousands of hours of digital tape. However, audio and video themselves are hard to search. As Fries notes, collection of recorded interviews often lie unused like showbox of home videos. The digital revolution offered tools to better exploit this raw material. Software can align transcript with audio, create time-coded transcripts, or automatically index transcript for search. More importantly, new system can link transcripts, annotations, and metadata directly to the audio-visual recording. Fries envisions an environment where oral history, audio, and video can now be placed in an environment in which rich annotation, cross-referencing codes, and other descriptive or analytical metadata can be linked to specific pieces of audio video content. In such a system, researcher might listen to a specific interview segment by clicking on a transcript line or search recordings by keyword in the transcript or even find passages by analyzing voice tunes. Some advocates even argue that audio might someday supplant transcript as the primary medium. Fries provocatively state that digitization could return orality to central importance and the text-based indexing may diminish in the dominance. For example, if oral archives are fully digitized and annotated, a student could navigate through interviews by them or person without reading a single word of transcript. In effect, the transcript may become just one access pathway useful for certain types of research among many. However, this future is not yet here. Current full text search and speech recognition tools still have limits. Automated speech to text technology hold promise but remains imperfect for historical recordings. Speakers in oral histories often have diverse accents, use local dialects, or overlap speech with background noise. Challenge for speech recognitions. Francis Good warns that those who claim to turn web to text automatically understand the difficulty. We are not entirely sure of what exactly is being processed, and human practice show that results are highly dependent on subjective variables. In other words, computers struggle with the nuance of unscripted speech. Such current practice still relies on human transcribers for accuracy. Nevertheless, digital tools have eased some burdens of transcription. Audio editing software lets transcribers slow playback, loop small segment, or speed up repeated words. Timestamp transcription program can sync audio with text for easier review. Some archives now use web interface allowing user to search transcript or listen to recording online. Each of these developments respond to Fries' call for new digital tools and the rich landscape of practice that may become powerful resource for oral historians. In summary, technology is extending how transcription is done and used, while the fundamental challenge remains. Translating speech into text, digital platforms are creating richer, more interactive uh, ways to engage with interviews. Oral historians now routinely deposit not just tape transcript but digital audio files, often making both available for study. This multimedia approach can mitigate some of the interpretive losses of transcription by allowing future researchers just to hear the original voice whenever possible. It is also means that transcription itself may be approached differently as just one layer of complex digital archive rather than the sole vehicle for the interview's content. So, transcription sits at the crossroad of methodology and ethics in oral history. As our review shows, it is not merely a clerical task but a complex interpretive act. The transcription process, from deciding which utterance to include to how to punctuate them, directly affects the resulting historical text. Willa K. Booms and Kate Moore's classic debates remind us that there are real tensions between producing a readable narrative and preserving the full orality of the speaker. Scholars have documented both the necessity of transcript for research and their intrinsic limitation. A meaning in here, in context and setting, in gesture, in tune, and the aspect lost in print. Yet, we create transcript because they help us catalog and share oral history. The push and pull between fidelity and interpretation means that oral historian must remain conscious of their goals. Are we transcribing for community access, scholarly analysis, or public reading? The answer guides decision. Inclusion of every might be crucial for linguistic analysis, while a community booklet might favor a clearance style. Authors like Francis Good and Michael Fries urge transparency. Researchers should state how transcripts were prepared and be aware that with more intervention, the greater is the distance that opens up between the primary oral and research user text. They also emphasize the responsibility owed to narrators who may feel vulnerable seeing their speech in print. As Good highlights, transcript producing can become a minefield when family and institution agenda collide. Digital technology adds a new dimension to these issues. On one hand, tools now exist to preserve more of the interview's immediacy, hyperlinks between audio and text, searchable multimedia archives, and eventually even improve speech recognition. On the other hand, the ease of disturbing transcript online heightens privacy risk, uh, pressing oral historian to guard personal narrative more vigilantly. In this evolving landscape, the core principle of oral history ethics remain constant: respect for interviewees and reflexivity in our methods. While transcription will likely remain essential in some form, future practitioners will also learn from Fries and others that there are worlds of meaning beyond words. The task is to ensure that whatever the medium, text or digital audio, we handle narrator's voice with care. I hope you all enjoy the class and we shall meet again in the next unit. Thank you.